Welcome to the Hidden Truths, where the most intimate mysteries come to life. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss a secret. Now, let's pull back the veil. David Holt's life had been perfect. He was a successful businessman, with an elegant penthouse, a well-established career, and the kind of reputation that people envied. He had everything a man could want, or so he thought. He had a beautiful wife, Rachel, who was the perfect partner, always by his side, attentive, loving. The couple had the life most people dreamed of. But what David didn't know was that his perfect life was built on one simple lie, one secret that had been buried beneath the surface for years. And it was about to unravel in the most unexpected way. Rachel had always been the picture of a devoted wife. But behind the scenes, she had been playing a dangerous game. She had met Andrew, a charming and powerful man, through mutual business connections. At first, it had started innocently, late-night business dinners, a few flirtatious exchanges, nothing serious. But over time, their connection deepened, and what had begun as an innocent affair soon turned into a full-blown love story. Rachel had always kept her marriage to David intact, but in her heart she had already made her choice. Andrew was the man she wanted to be with. David was nothing more than a convenient prop in her life, a stepping stone to the next phase of her future. But to make that future a reality, she needed to rid herself of her husband once and for all. Rachel's plan was simple, but brilliant. She would make it look like an accident. No one would ever suspect a thing. After all, David had always been a perfectionist, obsessed with his work and never paying attention to the details. He would never see it coming. She spent months laying the groundwork, carefully crafting a plan that would destroy David without a trace. She had Andrew on her side, of course. He was more than willing to help her. After all, he had his own ambitions, his own reasons for wanting David out of the picture. The two of them would be free to build a new life together, free from the complications of David's wealth and connections. The first step in her plan was to slowly poison David's trust. She began to withdraw emotionally, pulling away from him bit by bit. She became distant, harder to reach. She made excuses for her absence, blaming work, her friends, anything that would explain why she wasn't as affectionate as before. David didn't understand. He noticed the changes, but he didn't want to acknowledge them. He brushed off the growing distance between them, chalking it up to stress or work-related fatigue. At the same time, Rachel began to plant seeds in his mind, questions about the future, the life they had built. She subtly encouraged David to become more focused on his business, convincing him that his success was what really mattered, and that they both needed to prioritize it. Rachel's behavior became erratic, and David began to worry. It was when she started speaking about their future in terms of change and growth that he began to fear something was wrong. But it was too late. Rachel had already begun the next phase of her plan. Rachel knew exactly how to manipulate David's sense of trust. She was patient, methodical, playing her part perfectly. The next step in her plot involved Andrew. He was a good man for the job, charming, persuasive, and with the perfect blend of charisma and cunning. Rachel knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed someone David would trust, someone he would never suspect. Andrew began working his way into David's life, just as Rachel had done with David's business. He would offer advice, show interest in David's success, make him feel like they were friends. But underneath it all, he was planting the seeds of doubt. He subtly started making David question Rachel's loyalty. Small, casual comments. A misplaced glance, a little too much attention. And David, in his blind pursuit of success, took the bait. Slowly, the cracks in his marriage started to widen. He became obsessed with finding out who Rachel was really spending her time with. Why was she always out? Why was she pulling away? What was she hiding? It was the perfect storm. Rachel had him exactly where she wanted him. She had planted the seeds of doubt, and now all she had to do was let the storm brew. It wasn't long before David began to unravel. His suspicions grew, and so did his paranoia. He hired a private investigator to follow Rachel, to find out where she went at night. But the investigator came up with nothing. There were no signs of cheating, no evidence of an affair. Rachel was too careful, too clever. But David wasn't stupid. He started to see through the facade Rachel had built. He began to question the long hours she spent away from home. He began to doubt everything she had ever told him. And yet there was no proof. No evidence. Rachel's life was a perfect lie, and as much as David tried to fight it, he couldn't break through. But Rachel knew this game wasn't going to last forever. She couldn't keep the act up for long. So, she decided to escalate it. She needed to make sure David would never suspect what was really going on. That's when she decided to make her move. One evening, David came home to a scene that was nothing like he had ever imagined. He walked in, expecting another quiet evening with his wife, perhaps a late dinner, a glass of wine. Instead, he found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table, a look of cold determination on her face. And sitting across from her, Andrew. "Rachel?" David said, his voice tense. "What's going on?" Rachel stood up, the cold expression never leaving her face. She walked over to him, her steps slow, deliberate. "David," she said, her voice icy, "I'm leaving you. I'm done." David stared at her in shock. His mouth went dry. "What do you mean you're leaving me? What is this? What the hell is going on?" "This is the end of the road, David," she said, the word sharp, cutting through the air. "You're no longer a part of my life. You never were, really." David's world came crashing down in an instant. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His wife, the woman he had trusted, the woman he thought he knew, was standing in front of him, her heartless words stabbing him deeper than any knife ever could. And there, across the table, was Andrew, the man who had helped tear everything apart. "Are you kidding me?" David said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You're going to throw everything away for him? For this?" Rachel's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally getting what I deserve. And so is Andrew." David sat in the chair, staring at Rachel and Andrew as if the world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. The woman he had loved for years was standing before him, cold, distant, and full of a resolve he didn't recognize. His mind was spinning, his emotions clouded by a mixture of anger, betrayal, and confusion. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice low but thick with disbelief. Rachel crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze steady, unwavering. "It doesn't matter, David. What matters is that it's over now." The words hung in the air, slicing through the space between them. It was as though everything he had worked for, everything he had built with Rachel, had been completely erased in an instant. He had never seen her like this, never heard her speak with such cold certainty. "Rachel!" David's voice cracked, but he steadied himself. "I love you. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away." Rachel shook her head, her lips curling slightly, her expression almost pitying. "You were never enough for me, David. You were always too busy. Always too focused on your work, your success. I wanted more. And I found it. With Andrew." David turned to Andrew, his face filled with disgust. You're the reason my wife is walking away from me? The man I called a friend?" Andrew stood up slowly, his expression calm, almost detached. "I'm not the villain here, David," he said, his voice steady. "You were never the right man for Rachel. I'm just the one who recognized that." David's fists clenched, the rage boiling beneath the surface, but he forced himself to remain composed. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "Fine," David said, standing up and walking toward the door. "You both want to throw everything away, go ahead. But this isn't over. You've made a big mistake." As David walked out of the door, the cold air hit him like a slap in the face. He stood there for a moment, letting the shock of what had just happened sink in. The house, their home, felt empty now. The walls that had once symbolized love and companionship now felt like a prison. He could feel the weight of his failure pressing down on him. David wasn't a man to wallow in defeat for long. He had fought for everything he had in life, his success, his wealth, his career, and he wasn't about to let Rachel and Andrew take it from him without a fight. No, he would make them regret what they had done. He would show them that he wasn't a man to be discarded so easily. He had made a plan. It wasn't a perfect one, but it was the only option left. He would play them at their own game. And he would make sure that when it was all over, they would be the ones who would lose everything. David spent the next few days gathering information. He knew Rachel well enough to understand that she would try to cover her tracks, to play the victim, to make it look like she had done no wrong. He knew how manipulative she could be. But he had something they didn't expect. He knew her weaknesses. And that was what he would use against her. He began to dig into her life, her personal connections, her financial records, and most importantly, the things she had kept hidden. Her affair with Andrew had been exposed, but David needed more. He needed to show the world who Rachel truly was. He needed to prove that she had been scheming for much longer than she let on. David wasn't the only one who had secrets. Rachel's financial records were riddled with inconsistencies. He found payments made to offshore accounts, money that couldn't be accounted for. It was the leverage he needed to strike back. With this evidence, he could ruin her reputation, expose her as a fraud. He wasn't going to stop there. He knew Andrew's weaknesses, too. As much as he wanted to focus on Rachel, Andrew was just as much a part of this betrayal. He had been using his position to manipulate people, to get ahead. David would expose him for the corrupt cop he was. There was no way he could escape the fallout. The plan began to take shape. David contacted a few of his most trusted allies, people who owed him favors, people who had seen through Rachel's act long before he had. He began to spread the word about her shady dealings, the money she had hidden away, and her manipulative behavior. The whispers started again, louder this time. And then, when the timing was right, David made his move. He took everything he had, his proof of Rachel's financial fraud, his evidence of Andrew's corrupt dealings, and delivered it to the authorities. But not just any authorities. He had connections, people who would ensure that both of them would feel the full weight of their actions. It didn't take long for the police to begin their investigation. Rachel's business was scrutinized, her transactions examined. Andrew, too, found himself under suspicion. It didn't matter that they had been careful. David had ensured that their actions would come to light. The walls they had built around themselves started to crumble. Rachel and Andrew thought they could walk away from this without consequences. They thought they could destroy David and start fresh, but they hadn't counted on him fighting back. They hadn't counted on him knowing exactly how to make their lives fall apart. Days passed, and David watched as the lives of his betrayers began to unravel. Emily's business was seized by the authorities. The false money trail was uncovered. The people she had trusted with her secrets began to turn against her. And Nathan? The police had begun digging into his corrupt dealings, exposing him for the fraud he was. His career as a police officer was over. But despite the satisfaction of watching them fall, David still couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making sure they knew they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had chosen to tear him down. And now they were the ones left with nothing. Rachel reached out to David again, but this time, there was no apology in her voice. She had been exposed, and she was desperate. "Greg," she began, her voice cracking. "Please. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But please, I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't think it would end like this." David listened, his anger and pain slowly turning to cold detachment. He had already decided. There was no going back. "It's too late, Rachel. You made your choice. You wanted him. You wanted to destroy me. Now you're going to live with it." The days after Rachel's desperate plea for forgiveness felt like an eternity. Every part of me wanted to believe that I had done the right thing. Watching her life crumble, seeing Andrew's career as a police officer disintegrate, it should have felt like victory. But the truth was, it didn't bring me the peace I had expected. I had already won, but the victory felt empty. There was no satisfaction in seeing Rachel lose everything. It didn't fill the hole inside of me. All I could think about was how much I had lost, the trust, the love, the life I had once built with her. It was gone, and nothing I did could bring it back. But I wasn't done. Not yet. There was one final step I had to take before I could fully walk away from the wreckage of our past. Rachel and Andrew needed to understand that the cost of their betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was going to take everything from them, until there was nothing left. I knew Rachel better than she thought. She might have been trying to play the victim, but I had watched her manipulate people for years. She was good at it. And while I could see through her, I knew others could too. That's why I made sure to leak everything about her, the affair, her manipulations, her financial fraud, straight to the people who would make sure her name was tarnished beyond repair. I contacted a few people who owed me favors, journalists, businessmen, people with connections to the right social circles. I wanted her exposed. Not just for her lies, but for the woman she had become. I knew that this was the only way to make sure she would never escape the consequences. The media storm hit hard and fast. It didn't take long for the first article to drop, revealing every part of Rachel's double life. Her affair with Andrew. The falsified business reports. The hidden accounts. The people who had trusted her were now in shock, trying to figure out how they had been so blind. Rachel called me again, but this time, there was no pleading. There was no attempt to apologize. She knew it was over. Her voice was cold when she spoke. "Why, Greg?" she asked, her words bitter. "Why destroy everything we had? You think this will make you feel better? It won't. You're just as broken as I am." I couldn't help but laugh. "You've lost everything, Rachel. Your career. Your reputation. You're nothing now. And you're telling me I'm broken? You had the perfect life. And you threw it all away." Her silence spoke volumes. She knew I was right. She knew that everything she had done had led to this moment, but it didn't matter. She had no one left. I thought it would feel better. Seeing her exposed. Watching her fall from the pedestal she had so carefully built. But all I felt was a deep, hollow emptiness. Revenge had not brought the closure I had wanted. I had thought that by destroying her life, I could fill the void inside of me. But instead, I realized something important. Nothing would ever fill that emptiness. And then I thought about Andrew. The man who had been the final blow in my marriage. The one who had taken everything from me, without remorse. The man who had betrayed not only my trust, but my friendship. He had once been my closest ally, my confidant. But now, he was just a shadow of the person I once knew. And he was going to pay for everything he had done. It was time for the final act. I had already exposed Rachel, but Andrew? He was still standing tall, his career intact, his reputation largely unscathed. I knew I had to make him pay, just like I had made sure Rachel paid. I called an old contact of mine, someone who had ties to the press and law enforcement. I had to be strategic. If I went after Andrew directly, it would look like an act of vengeance. But if I worked the system, if I played the right cards, I could take him down without him ever realizing it. I started with his finances. Andrew had always been good at hiding things, but everyone has a weakness. He had a few offshore accounts, a few shady investments, things that could be easily twisted to make him look guilty of money laundering. I made sure those records fell into the hands of the right people. And I didn't stop there. I leaked details about his conduct as a police officer, his history of bending the rules, his connection to questionable business deals. The more I dug, the more I realized just how much dirt I could use against him. He thought he was untouchable, but in truth, he was no different from the man I had once been, prideful, arrogant, and blind to the consequences of his actions. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Andrew's reputation started to crack. The media picked up on the leaks, and soon, the stories of his corruption spread like wildfire. His colleagues turned on him. The people who had once respected him now viewed him with suspicion. The very same people who had covered for him were starting to back away, realizing they didn't want to be associated with someone who had let greed dictate his every decision. It wasn't long before the police department started their investigation into his actions. And once the investigation started, it didn't take long for his entire career to implode. His badge, his authority, everything he had worked for, gone in an instant. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines. I had done it. I had brought him down. And yet, when the dust settled, it still didn't feel like a victory. I had achieved what I had set out to do, but at what cost? Days turned into weeks, and I found myself standing at the crossroads of my own life. The things I had done, everything I had orchestrated, had left me feeling like I was the one who had lost. I had destroyed Rachel's life. I had destroyed Andrew's life. But in the process, I had destroyed something much more important, myself. I had done everything I could to make them feel the pain they had caused me. But now that it was over, now that they were both gone from my life, I was left with nothing. No closure. No satisfaction. Just an endless emptiness that I couldn't escape. I had won, but I had also lost. I spent the next few weeks trying to rebuild, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer felt like mine. I had started with vengeance, with the hope that it would bring me peace. But now, I realized that revenge had only taken me deeper into the darkness. One day, I received a letter from Emily. The words were simple, almost too simple to be real. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I've learned the hardest lesson of my life. You were right. I lost everything. And I will never get back what I threw away. I read those words over and over, each one sinking in like a sharp knife. But when I was done, I realized something. It didn't matter. Nothing she could say would fix what had happened. I had taken everything from her. But in the end, I had lost just as much. Thank you for being with us on the Hidden Truths. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The secrets are waiting to be revealed. See you soon.